The machines typed without stopping. Narrow strips of paper moved through metal guides, printed with abbreviated symbols and numbers that represented transactions occurring elsewhere. The sound was constant, a rhythmic tapping that filled offices where men stood near the devices watching the tape emerge. The information was live. It arrived electrically, translated into mechanical motion, and printed one character at a time. The tape accumulated in loose coils on the floor or in wire baskets. It could not be paused. The flow was continuous, and the output had to remain legible. Rooms were organized around these machines. Operators stood ready to monitor the feed, replace rolls of paper, and clear obstructions. The work was not complex, but it required attention. A jammed machine meant delayed information. A torn tape meant lost data. The system depended on mechanical reliability and human oversight. Prices moved, trades were recorded, and the tape printed it all in sequence. The ticker machine was an electromechanical typewriter designed for continuous operation. It received coded electrical pulses over telegraph lines and converted them into printed symbols. A rotating type wheel carried letters, numbers, and punctuation. When a signal arrived, the wheel turned to the correct character, struck the paper through an inked ribbon, and advanced the tape by one space. The paper was stored on a roll mounted inside the machine. It fed through a guide slot and emerged from the front at a fixed speed. The tape was 1 inch wide, thin enough to tear easily if handled roughly. Timing was controlled by the incoming signal. The machine could not type faster than the data arrived, and it could not fall behind without losing synchronization. Mechanical tension was adjusted by hand. If the feed was too tight, the tape snapped. If too loose, it bunched and jammed. The operator did not input data. He monitored output. His task was to ensure the machine continued printing without error and that the tape remained readable. He stood near the device, glancing at the emerging strip to confirm that symbols appeared clearly and that spacing was uniform. If the type wheel became misaligned, letters overlapped or printed faintly. If the ribbon dried out, the print faded. If dust accumulated inside the mechanism, characters failed to strike properly. The operator checked these details throughout the day. He replaced paper rolls before they ran out, swapped inked ribbons when contrast weakened, and adjusted the tension lever when the tape began to curl. He did not interpret the information. That was done by brokers, analysts, and traders who read the tape after it printed. His responsibility was mechanical continuity. The system could not afford downtime. Jams occurred without warning. The tape might catch on a worn guide, fold inside the feed slot, or tear mid-print if tension spiked during a burst of rapid transmission. The operator had to clear the obstruction, thread new paper, and restart the machine without losing more than a few seconds of data. Some jams required partial disassembly. The type wheel housing was lifted, the ribbon mechanism inspected, and any torn paper extracted from the gears. The operator worked quickly but carefully. Forcing a component could bend the alignment rod or crack the striker assembly. Once cleared, the machine resumed printing at the point where the signal continued. Lost characters were noted but not recovered. The tape was sequential. If a segment was missing, it stayed missing. Operators kept spare rolls and tools within arm's reach. The machines were not fragile, but they were not forgiving. Brokerage firms, banks, and newsrooms installed ticker machines in rows. A single office might operate a dozen units, each receiving a different data stream. Stock prices, commodities, bond yields, and wire service bulletins all moved through separate feeds. Operators rotated between machines, checking each one in turn. Tape was collected periodically and carried to desks, where clerks and analysts studied the printed sequences. Decision-making depended on the speed and accuracy of that output. A delayed machine meant delayed information. A misprint could be interpreted as a price change. Institutional reliance on mechanical printing created pressure on operators to maintain performance. There was no backup system. If a machine failed completely, replacement units were wheeled in, but until then, the operator was expected to keep it running. The work was repetitive, but the consequences of error were immediate. The operator stood for most of his shift. There were no chairs near the machines. He moved between units, bent to inspect feeds, and reached overhead to adjust tension levers. His hands were stained with ink from handling ribbons. His fingertips were dry from contact with paper. The sound of typing was unrelenting. Some operators worked in rooms with 20 or more machines running simultaneously. The noise made conversation difficult. Breaks were brief. Machines did not stop during lunch. If an operator stepped away, someone else took his place. The work was not physically demanding in the way manual labor was, but it required sustained attention over hours. Eyes grew tired from focusing on narrow strips of print. Hands cramped from threading paper and adjusting small components. The job offered no variation. Every day followed the same pattern. The machines typed, the tape printed, and the operator watched. Electronic displays appeared gradually, first as experimental installations, then as standard replacements. The screens showed the same information the tape had printed, but updated instantly and without mechanical output. There was no paper to replace, no jams to clear, no ink to monitor. The transition was not immediate, but it was decisive. Offices began removing ticker machines within months of installing display terminals. Operators were reassigned or released. Some moved to other clerical roles. Others left the industry entirely. The machines were disconnected, crated, and removed. A few were kept briefly as backups, but they were never reactivated. The screens were faster, quieter, and required no physical maintenance. The ticker tape, once essential, became unnecessary. The information continued to flow at the same speed, through the same networks, but nothing printed it anymore. The rooms grew quieter. The operators were gone. The data moved on. A small number of machines remained in service after the displays were installed. They were kept in back offices, connected but rarely monitored. Some institutions maintained them as archival devices, printing a physical record even though no one consulted the tape in real time. The operators who had worked the main floors were gone, but maintenance staff checked these units occasionally, replacing paper when rolls ran low and clearing jams that went unnoticed for hours. The tape coiled onto the floor in long loops, untouched until someone gathered it for storage or disposal. The machines ran slower now, processing secondary feeds that no longer required immediate attention. They were not shut down deliberately, they simply became irrelevant. Eventually, the paper supply was discontinued. Replacement parts were no longer manufactured, the machines stopped when they broke, and no one repaired them. They were wheeled into storage rooms and left. The tape itself was kept in some places. Rolls of printed output were boxed and archived, stored in basement rooms alongside ledgers and transaction records. The paper was fragile. It yellowed quickly and tore if handled roughly. Some firms maintained these archives for regulatory purposes, though retrieval was rare. The printed symbols remained legible for years if kept dry, but few people could interpret them without cross-referencing code sheets that were also archived and seldom accessed. The tape had been a live document, meaningful only in the moment it emerged. Once stored, it became a static record of events already past. Archivists cataloged the boxes by date and source, but the material was never digitized. It was kept because disposal procedures had not been established. Eventually, space constraints forced decisions. Most of the tape was shredded or discarded. The last machines were removed quietly. There were no announcements or ceremonies. Maintenance crews disconnected the units, loaded them onto carts, and took them to warehouse facilities or disposal contractors. A few were donated to museums or technical schools, where they were displayed behind glass or kept in storage. Most were scrapped. The metal housings were separated from the electrical components and processed as salvage. The type wheels, ribbon spools, and striker assemblies were discarded. The technology had no successor. Electronic systems did not build on the mechanical principles of the ticker. They replaced them entirely. The information that had once been printed onto narrow strips of paper now appeared on screens, transmitted digitally and displayed without physical output. The flow had not stopped. The method had changed. Prices still moved, trades were still recorded, and the data still arrived in sequence. It simply no longer required paper.